Ever stop and wonder what really makes a piece of land officially yours? I mean, it's not the fence you put up or the house you build on it. No, it's this incredibly detailed, kind of invisible blueprint of ownership and history, all run by a super dense rulebook, like the Haryana Land Records Manual. Today, we're going to unlock that blueprint. So let's just kick off with a huge question. Who really has the final say that you own your land? You might think it's that deed you have tucked away in a safe somewhere, but the real proof, the thing that holds up in court, is what's written down in the official government record, and that's exactly what we're digging into. All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to unpack what your land's official story even is. Then we'll see what it takes to actually change that story, like when a property is inherited. We'll also get into how every single inch gets mapped out, meet the folks who keep these all-important records, and finally, get to the big one: why this whole system matters so much. Okay, let's jump right in. First up, the official story. See, every plot of land out there has its own unique biography, and it all boils down to one single, absolutely critical document. That document is called the Record of Rights, or in many places, the Jamabandi. The best way to think of it is as the land's official biography. It's created at the village level by an official called a patwari, and it lists every single detail the government considers to be fact: who owns it, who's farming it, exactly how big it is, the whole shebang. Now, if you actually looked at one, you'd see it's not just a wall of text. It's all broken down. Each plot of land gets its own field number. Think of it like a unique ID. It clearly states the owner, but also any tenant who might be working the land. And that remarks column, that's where the interesting stuff is. It's where you'll find notes on things like mortgages or any official changes in the pipeline. It's a living document. Okay, so that's all well and good, but what happens when things change? Land gets sold, property gets passed down. Let's walk through a super common example, an inheritance, to see how this official record actually gets updated. So, anytime ownership changes, whether it's a sale, a gift, an inheritance, you name it, it has to be formally recorded. This isn't automatic. It's a very specific legal process, and it's called a mutation. That's the official term for changing the land's biography. And this process follows 4 very clear steps. First, the event happens. Someone inherits the land. Second, the patwari makes a note of it in a special logbook just for mutations. Third, and this is crucial, a more senior revenue officer has to review and officially approve the change. Sometimes they even do this in a public forum to keep things transparent. And only after that final sign-off is the main record of rights officially changed. But life is complicated, and this rulebook actually accounts for some pretty wild situations. Get this. A child born up to 280 days after their father has died is still considered a full legal heir. The rules also flat out say that a murderer cannot inherit property from the person they killed. And if an owner dies with no heirs at all, the land goes to the government in a process called ishchit. Now, a record of who owns what is one thing, but it's not much good if you don't know the exact boundaries of what they own. This brings us to the incredibly precise world of land surveys and mapping. For centuries, people weren't using feet or meters. They used traditional units like the karam, which is about 66 inches, and they measured area in things called marlas and canals. Today, the system is shifting to standard metric units, meters and hectares. But these old terms are so deeply baked into the records that you still have to know what they mean. I mean, let's be real. Most fields are imperfect squares, so how do you measure the area of some weirdly shaped 5-sided plot? Well, the manual is basically a geometry textbook. It's packed with formulas that show officials how to slice any odd shape into simple triangles and rectangles to get a precise calculation. That's great for a field you can walk around. But what about something you can't physically cross? Like, how do you measure the width of a river when you're stuck on one side? Okay, the solution in the manual for this is just brilliant. It's totally low-tech, just simple geometry. You mark a point directly across the river, then you make a right-angled line on your own bank. By using some clever triangulation, you can measure a line on your side of the river that turns out to be the exact same length as the river's width. No lasers, no GPS, just pure practical math. It's awesome. And while we're on the topic of rivers, they move. Floods can change their course completely, so the manual has a whole section on what it calls alluvion and diluvion, which is really just a fancy way of dealing with land that gets added or washed away by the water. And these rules are so detailed, they can be used to settle boundary disputes between villages or even entire states.
So, who are the people actually in charge of managing this whole incredibly detailed system? Let's meet the guardians of this land blueprint.
There's a really clear hierarchy. At the village level, you have the patwari. They're the person on the ground, maintaining the map and the records. Above them is the kanungo, who acts as a supervisor, checking the patwari's work. And then at the very top of the district is the collector, who's in charge of the entire system. And this isn't just some informal arrangement. It's literally written into the law, the Punjab Land Revenue Act. It says right there that the collector shall control all other revenue officers. This establishes a rock-solid chain of command and accountability. And I love this detail. The manual isn't just about abstract laws. It gets into the real-world stuff. It even had plans to build about 20 new patwarkhanas, which are just offices for the patwaris, each year. It shows they were thinking about the practical infrastructure needed to keep the whole thing running smoothly. All right, we've looked at the documents, the processes, and the people. But let's zoom out for a second. Why does a rulebook like this really, truly matter? Because it is so much more than just paperwork. Honestly, this system is the bedrock for so much of our society. It gives us legal clarity on who owns what. That clarity creates economic stability because you can take your land record to a bank and get a loan. They trust it. It also helps create social order because there's a fair process for settling disputes. And for the government, it's an absolute gold mine of data for taxes, planning, and resource management. And this quote right here, from the law itself, really gets to the heart of its power. Any entry in the record shall be presumed to be true. Think about that for a second. It means the record is legally considered fact unless someone else can prove it's wrong. The burden of proof is on the person challenging the record. That's what gives the whole system its authority. Of course, this system isn't stuck in the 19th century. The manual is a living document, and it's been updated to include rules for new digital systems like Web Hauris. We're talking about digitally signed records, online access, modernizing a process that's been done on paper for generations. And this all brings us to one last really important question. As a system that was built on physical maps and handwritten books moves online, the core principles, accuracy, authority, they're still the same. But the challenges are totally new. How will this rulebook, this unseen blueprint of ownership, adapt to face things like cybersecurity and the power of having instant data access? Well, that's the next chapter in the story of our land.